Hey friends, today I'm going to be teaching you guys how to splice leather. We're going to use a couple of things for this video, and first of all I'm going to show you what I'm going to use. This is some goat skin. It's 1.2 millimeters thick. It's easier to use a grained leather, which is why I'm using goat skin, but you can do the same technique with any leather really. You will be able to hide the splice much easier, however, if it does have grain. The next thing we're going to need is some masking tape. This one is by 3M. It is, I'll tell you what it is in a second. It's a 101E. It's the one I use for pretty much all leathers. We're going to need to use a ruler as well so that we can measure out 10 millimeters, 1 centimeter, which is how much of the leather we're going to splice together. That's the overlap, and we're going to use some glue to stick them together. This one is a contact adhesive, a water-based contact adhesive called EcoSar 116ADNG, I believe it is. I get it from Pro Italia Plus. It's a really good polyurethane glue, I think it is. Most important thing we're going to need is a skiving knife. So this one's by a Pros France. I know that's not how you pronounce it, but oh well. So we're going to need a skiving knife. We're also going to need a strop. And we're going to need a strop so that we keep the knife nice and sharp. We might have to strop it a couple of times during this, or maybe once during this, but you want to keep your knife really sharp for a splice. So this is just a simple piece of leather with some polishing compound. We're also going to need a hammer so that we can hammer together the splice once we've glued it together. But make sure, and it's really important, that the head of the hammer is really shiny, so you don't mark the leather, especially if it's a smooth one. So we're going to mark out 10 millimeters, and then we're going to mark it with the masking tape, which is why we need the masking tape in the first place. So we're going to measure out 10 mil. It's one of the reasons I love this ruler, is because it's clear, so you can line it up really nicely. So once we've done the outside part, that's the part that you'll see on the top obviously, we're then going to mark, we're going to masking tape off the back side, the second half of what will be the one strip, and that's the back side. So that's the flesh side and the grain side, both with a piece of masking tape on them, ready to be skived together. Now we're ready to skive down both halves. It's really important that you take your time with this. Don't rush this at all. Now, one of the reasons we use the masking tape obviously is to mark out 10 mil. The other reason to keep it still whilst it's on the stone, but it's a really good way of keeping that line really crisp. Because yes, you could put some pen on the back of it, but it wouldn't quite be the same. With this one, which is we're skiving the flesh, we want to get that down to 0, or as close to 0 as we can get it at the edge. So it's literally a feather edge. And the reason for that is the bigger the edge that goes on top, this part's going to be the underneath. The thicker the part that goes on top, the more you'll see the splice. Now I don't quite get it thin enough actually in this particular, as I'm doing it here. I could get it thinner, that was my mistake. And you'll see at the end that you can just about see the join. The secret to having a completely invisible skive, completely invisible splice, is actually the part that goes on top, which is the back side. It needs to be completely feather thin at the edge. Also, when you're skiving the underside, the grain side, because you'll see how I overlap them in a minute, it's very important that you don't go right up to the line where you've marked out the 10 mil. It's very, very important, because you're going to glue all the way up, and if you skive right to the line, so where the masking tape is, you run the risk of having just a little bit of the skived off leather visible. So as you can see, I'm taking a lot of time here to not quite get up to the line. Also, don't worry about skiving off a little bit too much at the feather end of this skive, the thin end of this skive. As you'll see in a second, I actually take off just a little bit too much at the thin part of this particular part, and it doesn't matter, because that's going to be underneath, and it's actually better in a way, kind of, because the thinner you get these, the smoother you get this transition, the more invisible. Here it is, you'll see, there it goes. I take off just a corner, and the smoother this transition, the more invisible your splice will be when you're finished. And as you can see, it's right up to the edge, but not quite there. So now it's time to put the glue on, not glue them together, but now it's time to put the glue onto both of the ends, and we're going to put it over the tape so that we get 100% of that edge glued. And it's one of the reasons, like I said, we don't skive right up to the edge, because it might peel up, but also you might see a little bit of the undyed sort of flesh of the leather. So we're going to put a nice liberal coating, liberal coating of glue on both edges. You might need to put your finger underneath it just to make sure that you've got some support, because that edge is very, very thin. It's down to 0 millimeters at the end, 0.0 at the end. It's very, very thin. So obviously, once you've applied the glue, make sure that it goes completely clear afterwards, regardless of if it's water-based or solvent-based. So now it's time to put those two together, and a little tip is if you bend it in half, it makes it a little bit easier, because you want to stick one side down and line it up really, really straight. That's why I've put it against a ruler. And then take your time to put it right up against that masking tape. That's your guide of how close to stick them together. So once you've pushed it down with your finger, you can then follow it up with a hammer. But before you hammer it down, make sure you take the tape off. Take the tape off as soon as you can. Otherwise you will get glue dry between the two, and it will be really, really challenging to clean it up afterwards. And then the final step to make it perfect is to cut off the sides, because when you stick it together and you hammer it, it will splay it out. It will make it slightly wider at the splicing line. So it's good to make it even more invisible. You need to cut off that join line, either side. Well, not join line, but where it's splayed out, where it's wider, just take a really sharp knife, and it's not a lot of leather that you're cutting off, it's just a little itty bitty sliver down the side. And there we go, we're all done. As you can see, that join is very, very difficult to see. I've got a lot of lights on in my studio, which is why you can see it as well as you can, but if you just see that by itself, you won't notice it. So what I'm doing now is taking some crepe rubber and just rubbing off the little bit of glue that came through the side to make it as clean as possible. And you will see a little bit of that, the join, just because I didn't get it quite as thin as I'd like. But thank you very much for watching, guys. Don't forget to subscribe and join me for the next one.